Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Building Minnesota's Farm-to-Institution Markets, a 2014 Producer Survey Perspective. My name is Pete Huff, and I work as the Director of Food Systems at the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy. I'm joined on the webinar by my project partners, Jason Walker, the Communications Coordinator for the Sustainable Farming Association, and Grace Brogan, the Farm to Child Care Program and Communications Manager for Renewing the Countryside. This webinar that we're presenting, as well as the work that stands behind it, has been a collaborative effort between our three organizations, all of which share our commitment to ensuring that farm-to-institution markets are accessible and beneficial for farmers, ranchers, and other food producers of Minnesota and the upper Midwest as a whole. Our webinar today will focus on the highlights of a farm-to-institution survey that was conducted in the fall of 2014, including some key findings and next steps. These outcomes are summarized in our newly released report that's available on the partner websites. We'll share a link for that shortly, so you can follow up and read all the details from the survey. We'll just be presenting a few highlights today. For those of you that are joining us who completed the survey, thank you for your input. We definitely couldn't have done this without your help. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. I wanted to run you through some of the basics for the webinar in case you haven't been on one before. These will help you get the most out of your experience today. If you have any trouble with our audio, you can use the webinar control panel that's on your screen to access a telephone call-in number. This will let you dial in via phone and use a PIN number to hear the audio while watching the webinar on your computer. If you're having trouble with this, or anything for that matter, you can use the webinar control panel on your screen to ask a question for our webinar tech guru, Patrick, who's on the other end to help. Also, your microphone is muted throughout the whole of the webinar, and that helps us keep the background noise down. But this doesn't mean you can't participate. In fact, we want you to participate a lot during this next session. So you can use the webinar control panel to submit a question at any time for any of the panelists on any issue throughout the webinar. So if you have a question that pops up, feel free to put it in there. And at the end of the presentations, we'll have 10 to 15 minutes for questions and answers. Finally, the webinar is being recorded and will be available on the IATP website and the YouTube channel. You can see the links for those on the screen right now. So feel free to visit that for this video as well as other videos from IATP. You can check this out later if you can't stay on for the full time today, but also feel free to share it with others who you think might be interested but can't necessarily join us today. So really quickly, before we get into the content, just wanted to say a little bit about the partnering organizations. So this project represents a collaborative effort between the three organizations that I've mentioned, and we combined our forces really to create a greater impact in that we are doing a lot of similar and shared work, and we could align a lot of our values and our missions. So I'd like to just give you a little bit of background about these organizations in case you're not familiar, as each one brings something very unique and irreplaceable to this project. So the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy has been around for about 25 years, and essentially the organization works locally and globally at the intersection of policy and practice to ensure fair and sustainable food, farm, and trade systems. Renewing the Countryside is working for a more just, vibrant, and sustainable rural America by championing and supporting communities, farmers, artists, and entrepreneurs who are revitalizing the countryside through innovative initiatives. And finally, the Sustainable Farming Association supports the development and enhancement of sustainable farming systems through farmer-to-farmer networking, innovation, demonstration, and education. So you can check out the websites there for all three organizations for a lot of information about this topic of farm to institution, but also a whole lot else on everything from agriculture, rural communities, farmers' issues, and food. Finally, and probably most importantly, you can download and read the newly released report that presents all of the findings from our survey by visiting the IATP website and the partner websites. This report will be available via the websites at any time. You can download it in PDF format. So don't worry about rushing to copy down this URL. That's a little long, but we'll make sure that we put it back up on the last screen of the webinar so that you can jot it down and then read the full report at your leisure. So from here, we'll give you a background on the development of the survey and some of the key highlights and findings, as well as some next steps for building farm-to-institution markets in Minnesota and the Midwest. And this includes the social and economic benefits that farm-to-institution markets provide for not only farmers, but also the people that enjoy their food and the communities that they share. So at this time right now, I'm going to pass it off to Jason from the Sustainable Farming Association to provide a little bit of background on the development of the survey, including a little bit about farm-to-institution practices and why we focused the survey on this particular topic.
All right, thanks, Pete. Okay, so as Pete said, I'm Jason Walker. I'm the Communications and Membership Coordinator for the Sustainable Farming Association. Some background on the survey. This was a unique effort to align the work of organizations focused on local food markets, to listen to producers on next steps needed to grow farm-to-institution sales. The main goal here is to make these sales easier for producers while making them more profitable. It was an online producer survey on farm-to-institution in Minnesota created by our organizations with help from over 15 other organizations, government agencies, and farms. And we know that farm-to-institution is fairly robust in Minnesota. 72% of schools engage in these practices. Yet a variety of reasons can make accessing these markets difficult for producers. Food safety requirements, logistical needs, and many others. So we went straight to the source, the Minnesota and Upper Midwestern sustainable farming community, to gain a more complete picture of the challenges producers face, as well as the possible solutions and workarounds that either already exist or could be created. So what is farm to institution? Broadly, it consists of initiatives that connect producers with nearby public and private institutions to provide fresh, healthy, and minimally processed foods for their clients. So these could be K-12 schools, preschools, child care centers, home child care providers, universities, colleges, adult care centers, basically any institution, and they really run the gamut from giants like the University of Minnesota and huge urban hospitals to small daycares and everything in between. So you can see why this additional research was necessary. These institutions all have similar needs in terms of food goals. They want healthy, fresh food. But institution sizes vary wildly, and they are plentiful throughout the state in communities large and small. So why are these sales important? Well, we know that institutions feed a large and diverse number of people every day, and these sales can make producers more profitable. But they also keep dollars in the community where the food is raised and can have a greater local impact on other businesses. In these cases, farm-to-institution sales can keep the producer happy by expanding their profitability, the institution happy by giving their clients the fresh, healthy food they need, and the community happy by keeping those dollars straight in that community. Who participated in the survey? Well, SFA is a farmer-to-farmer network organization, so our role is to link our people with the survey and overall project, which would ultimately benefit our members in the sustainable farming community. SFA's membership is quite diverse, and the survey demographics were too. People came from many different situations. We engaged 142 producers in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and South Dakota, and here a couple things stand out. 41% of respondents were, quote, beginning farmers with 0 to 5 years of experience. That's a pretty large percentage of relatively new farmers who were interested in these farm-to-institution sales. Smaller acreages were also prevalent. 24% were 1 to 3 acres. 16% were 10 to 49 acres. Also, 62% were individual or family farm operations. So with these stats, you can see that we had a pretty diverse crowd, and we feel that made the survey all the more valuable. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Pete.
All right. Thanks for that, Jason. Switch over screens here. Okay. So with that kind of basic overview of who responded to the survey, we'll get into a little bit of some of the highlights and take a deeper dive on the type of products that survey respondents were growing in 2013. So as you can see, the graph above, or graph on your screen right now, shows the percentage based on gross farm income. And most respondents provided more than one response due to the fact that they're running diversified operations that are growing a lot of different products in the same farm. So as you can see, perishable vegetables were the predominant crop, followed by beef and bison. We can assume that respondents were growing quite a bit of perishable vegetables because they usually are lower price per pound, and beef and bison are usually more expensive. So they look like there's quite a bit of the meat there, but that might not necessarily be representative to the total production volume. So we know that most of the people that were growing or that responded to this were growing perishable vegetables that we're all familiar with. So the key takeaway point from this particular graph is that Minnesota institutions are essentially interested in purchasing perishable vegetables as one of their primary buys from farmers. And these are the type of products that Minnesota producers are growing, particularly the things that you see up on the screen. So as far as demand goes, there seems to be a match between this, with the supply demographic. It's just about the connectivity that links the farms to the buyers and the institutions. It's also interesting to take a look at where the survey respondents were selling their products in 2013. The table shows the market channels based on the percentage of gross farm income for 2013. And respondents, again, could choose multiple answers because similar to production, we know that respondents usually are selling their products via diversified market channels, typically not just going to one. They don't have all their eggs in one basket. So we can see that by and large, most respondents were selling to CSA markets, with 45% of respondents listing that as one of their market channels. And this was followed closely by wholesale and grower cooperatives. And so while it's not surprising that direct-to-consumer markets such as CSAs and farmers markets would have interest in institutional markets as well, it's encouraging to note that farm-to-institution is of interest to those that are selling to wholesale markets and cooperatives. This is because these particular market channels are both well-suited for meeting the needs of institutions. And you'll notice on there that there aren't really a lot of institutions. And in fact, there's no institutions on there. That's beyond that map, or that chart, if you were to go down, you'd see that institutional sales were reported by less than 10% of the respondents for their total market channel sales in 2013. But that's okay, because looking forward to the future, this graph is particularly important, and it really provides a simple and very poignant message that 3 out of every 4 producers that responded to the survey indicated that they had an interest in pursuing farm-to-institution or institutional markets as one of their market channels for their business in the coming years. Despite the fact that farm-to-institution was a small percentage of most farm sales in 2013, which was evident in the previous slide, this graph is fairly optimistic, showing that producers are not only aware of institutional markets, but also considering them to some extent. And we can thank things like the farm-to-school movement for building quite a bit of awareness about farm-to-school and farm-to-institution practices as a whole, and really the normalization of this practice is something that's quite positive for the future outlook. So if we were to look at further information from the survey, we'd see that those who were actually selling to institutions, that 10% in 2013, really K-12 schools were the predominant market, with 46% of those that were selling to those markets. And this is, again, not surprising due to the fact that there's a very active farm-to-school community and the National Farm-to-School Network, as well as quite a lot of efforts being put on by state departments of agriculture and the USDA. This is also beyond the farm-to-school or the K-12 schools. For 2013, we see that universities and colleges, as well as hospitals, were also quite popular for producers to sell to. Again, this is not a tremendous surprise due to the activities of a lot of groups and actors within these particular sectors. But if we're looking forward to that 77% that said that they were interested, the areas that they were most interested in expanding were into universities, and then followed by hospitals. So now that K-12 schools are quite popular and potentially slowing down a little bit, we see universities and colleges and hospitals who are also major buyers. More importantly, they're major buyers more consistently throughout the year, emerging close behind the schools. And so there's also quite a bit of continued interest, of course, in K-12 schools, adult and elderly care centers, child care, and preschools. Those are, of course, also popular. It's also interesting to understand why survey respondents were selling their products to institutions in 2013. And the table above shows the market channels based on, above shows the various reasons why the producers were interested in selling to institutions. Producers at farm to institution markets are different than other markets due to their unique benefits that they provide. As we can see, it's not just about making money, there's also some social and business value that comes out of it as well. So such benefits have been demonstrated by a number of longitudinal studies of long-standing farm-to-school programs in particular throughout the country. So we know that these are not just perceptions, that they are being backed up by quite a bit of research and study. However, farm to institution faces a number of barriers that are common with any emerging market for agriculture and food. These are barriers that are often a result of the larger challenges of the food system. These barriers must be addressed openly and creatively to reduce the disincentives for producers to enter the market with confidence. And by doing so, we increase the draw of the incentives that were listed on the previous slide and encourage behavior change within the way that food moves through a food system. Not surprisingly, if we look at the major barriers, low purchasing price and supply-demand alignment were identified. The fact that fair and steady prices were listed as benefits on the previous slide seems to demonstrate that there is either a diverse range of producer experiences with purchasing prices from institutions, or that there is an awareness that institutional markets are fair in their pricing, but may not be as high margin as other markets such as restaurants or farmers markets. Moderate barriers include things like seasonality mismatch, a challenge that's predominantly faced by educational institutions like K-12 schools who are out for the summer when most farms are producing at their peak, as well as delivery logistics, which is a challenge for many small to medium scale farmers regardless of their market spread. Finally, the mild barriers included 3 surprisingly low ranked barriers: sizing, packaging requirements of institutions, such as the ripeness that tomatoes need to be or how carrots get bagged and brought in, food safety requirements, such as Good Agriculture Practice certifications or GAP certification, as well as liability cost. These barriers we anticipated to be much higher, but it's likely that they're only considered mild due to the fact that there's significant work being done by extension educators, nonprofit groups, and others over the past decade to really reduce the impact that this has on farm to school and farm to institution. So we'll just step in really quickly here, and perhaps the most important part of this survey comes from the information on the types of resources that producers want when accessing institutional markets on the local and regional level. As you can see, these tools correspond to the barriers listed on the previous slide. The first being information on aggregation and setup, or aggregation setup and support, such as food hubs and cooperatives. The second tool being institution-specific product specification sheets and checklists about how they want products delivered. The third is business planning advice that's specific to starting or expanding institutional sales. The fourth is developing regional institution contacts and directories, essentially who to call and how to connect with them most effectively. The fifth being food safety training and support. And finally, advanced purchasing needs from regional institutions. So what's needed when? So it's clear. So what's clear from this is that producers want to work together using simple tools that are supported by easy means of building relationships with institutions in their area. These areas are key intervention points for government and nonprofit programs to help bridge the gap between producers and emerging farm to institution markets. So these are essentially the tools that we want to see in the toolkit. Perhaps just as important as the content of those tools for producers to engage institutional markets is the means by which they would like to access these tools. A tool is only as good as the ability to access it. So as you can see above on the left, survey respondents were interested in a mix of in-person and online access points. The top being regional producer-buyer networking events, the next being in-person workshops. Online producer-buyer directories came in as the third point. The fourth is informational webinars, and finally online resources in general. What this demonstrates is that producers want tools that not only keep them connected with each other and growing as a community, but also want resources that can be easily accessed from the farm and flexible with the farm schedule, which doesn't always leave a lot of time for going to webinars or going to workshops in person. Along with this is who producers want to work with via in-person and online forums. In true peer-to-peer style, survey respondents reported that they wanted to work with each other, so producers working with producers, and also doing this through existing producer networks, and this is to develop best practices for farm-to-institution sales together. They also were interested in working with institutional staff directly to build working relationships, engage in mutual education. The previous two slides are vital for taking the next step in building farm-to-institution markets and overcoming the identified barriers. What we'll do right now, before we pass up to Grace, is just make a quick note that what we just went through in the past slides is just a small snapshot of the information that's provided in the overall survey. There's a lot more information through 38 questions, and so definitely hop on there. We just included some of the highlights here. So with that, I will pass the slides over to Grace, who's going to take us through the next section of next steps.
Thank you, Pete. As Pete mentioned, my name is Grace Brogan. I am a program manager at Renewing the Countryside, and I'm pleased to be joining you all today in this discussion about farm-to-institution markets in Minnesota. I'm going to talk a little bit about what producers recommended as key kind of next steps and issues related to the barriers that we looked at in our survey. Number one was overcoming low purchasing price. Improved education of institutions on the costs and benefits of locally produced food was named, as well as increased funding and resources to purchase and use locally produced food. So we're looking at a lot of the ways to assist with these issues already in the state of Minnesota and nationwide. For example, the Farm to School Policy Group, of which IATP is taking a lead role and is a diverse collaboration of organizations, agencies, and institutions interested in moving supportive legislation forward, are working on how we might be providing more institutional support, funding, and education to both sides of the market, food buyers and farmers. And this is just one example of one of the ways that we're working on some of these low purchasing price issues. Another key barrier was meeting large volume requirements. And producers mentioned the importance of improving aggregation capacities and resources, and improving systems for advanced procurement needs and contracting to understand and have systems in place between farmers and institutions to make all of the information sharing necessary when there are large volumes moving. Many community partnerships across Minnesota are working on developing or refining regional food hubs for aggregation purposes. The University of Minnesota Extension has state and nationwide resources available online, both covering what projects are already in development or in operation, and it includes case studies and resources for communities interested in learning more. For Minnesota specifically, there are food hubs in pretty good geographic distribution. The Headwaters Foods in Bemidji, there's one in Fergus Falls as well. Sprout is in Brainerd. Omania has one developing. There's a food hub in Wilmer, Mankato, and in southeast Minnesota. They're also working on this. So that's just one example of where you can find more resources on what's already happening and how to learn more, whether you're a farmer interested in developing aggregation in your community, or you're a community member interested in making sure that you can meet these requirements of your institution. getting what you need from the various farm sizes in your community. At the same time, it's important to consider that the majority of survey respondents, at least in this case, were quite small farms, and that some institutions, although the term institution may sound large and overwhelming, might actually be a really good fit for smaller operations, like elder care facilities and daycare homes, which also have consistent purchasing needs throughout the year, including the summer. So taking advantage of both aggregation to meet the needs of larger institutions and looking at the benefits of smaller settings that regularly need fresh, healthy food are ways that farmers can meet and understand and learn about and move through these key barrier areas. Another point was addressing seasonality concerns. Improved access and support for season extension and product storage, as well as value-added potential, and improving communication channels between producers and purchasers was also noted. So in this seasonality concerns area of barriers, it's important that we continue to work on what we've already kind of built foundations for. But there is a lot happening on the ground here in Minnesota. The University of Minnesota Extension and partners like FFA at their annual conference have and continue to host workshops on season extension techniques like deep winter greenhouses, and offer a variety of resources, both nation and statewide, available online and in hard copy to assist with the expansion of season extension, storage options, and value-added products, including funding for these types of expansions on the farm as well. So there are resources out there. We can continue to work on it and make that information clear and available to farmers on the ground. Communication channels between producers and purchasers can come in a variety of forms. One way of establishing these connections are regional farmer-buyer networking events, which were noted in the survey as useful and important experiences for many farmers who responded. And Renewing the Countryside has hosted or co-hosted a number of these over the years and plan to host them again in the future. Move on to the next slide, next steps. And we kind of covered some of these, but we'll make sure we're hitting all of our points. Creating information and tools to align farm business plans and institutional needs. Like I discussed earlier, expanding aggregation capacities and resources. There's a good number of items available, but continuing to host workshops and make those connections, develop those resources, and make sure the resources are actually reaching farmers is important. Developing simple and accessible cross-institution procurement is also important. Specifications for procurement. It can be really complicated and confusing, so kind of understanding and developing simple and easy to access and understand means of doing that is something that can definitely be part of the development of resources and in potential trainings and workshops. We also want to provide specialized farm business planning advice on institutional sales. There are a number of projects in the state right now that are connecting beginning and kind of mid-career farms with business planning advice. And this could be an added piece of that or expanded programming. And then on to part 2, providing resources via mix of complementary in-person and online formats. Continuing to expand regional networking events and workshops is something we already spoke about a little bit. And developing online contact directories and online training are important to make those accessible as well, and that's something our partnership with SFA and with IATP can definitely move forward on in the future. Part 3 here is also really important, delivered and maintained by peer-to-peer networks with expert support. This is an important next step. And who should be involved? I would say SFA is a very important player in the state, clearly, and I'm glad that they're part of this project because their peer-to-peer networks are long-standing. And although they're currently most popularly and historically separated by geographic region, they're also developing some networking groups based on areas of interest as well. So these peer-to-peer networks and maintaining and supporting those connections and expanding them is really important, as is building a platform for integration of public and private sector expertise through some of the existing programs we have now and expanding them as well. So just to speak a little bit more on what's already happening on the ground, kind of on some of these next steps and who's already involved in areas for future collaboration and expansion. On-farm food safety and good agricultural practice training are happening through the University of Minnesota's food safety experts, Michelle Sherman and Annalisa Hulper. University of Minnesota Extension and their regional sustainable development partnerships are helping disperse this information. The Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Agriculture and Renewing the Countryside have hosted post-harvest handling workshops this spring, and NISA has many resources available for farmers interested in getting into wholesale and understanding the regulations of some of these new markets. Both IATP and Renewing the Countryside are working on farm-to-child care programming and farm-to-school policy that could support farm-to-institution supportive policies insofar as providing more support to farmers and understanding food safety, perhaps institutionalizing farm-to-school coordinators at the Minnesota Department of Education or the Minnesota Department of Agriculture at some point so that there's strong support for this kind of institutional markets at those state agencies. That farm-to-school policy working group has collaborators from across the state and many fields interested in moving this forward within the next couple of years in the legislature. And I would say again that SFA's peer-to-peer networking is really important. And that the work at SFA really comes from the ground up, from farmers and their peers. So as I mentioned, they're well known for their geographic chapters, but they're also starting networking groups based on areas of interest, like forage and deep winter greenhouses. So if there is interest from the ground on developing an interest group on farm-to-institution markets and sales in Minnesota, that's definitely a possibility, and you're more than welcome to contact Jason, whose email will be available on the next slide, if that's something that you think you'd like to start in the state of Minnesota with the Sustainable Farm Association. So that's kind of a few key areas where we have some next steps, and we know that there is some great work happening on the ground, and we are hoping to expand and grow. And we want to hear from you. We want to know what sort of questions you have. I welcome you to use the chat box to let our presenters know what they are. And I want to thank you for your time today. Thank you for taking this bit of time out of your busy day and for learning a little bit more about the results of the survey. For those of you who participate in our survey, we all appreciate your time. And I'd also like to thank our panelists and support staff, Pete Huff, Jason Walker, and Patrick. And right now I'd say let's open There's a question we have from Claire Fitch. The producers talk about the kickbacks that food service companies receive from large-scale manufacturers and producers as a barrier to entering the market. And I might put that one over to Pete. Did producers talk about rebates that food service companies receive from large-scale manufacturers and producers as a barrier?
Yeah, thanks, Grace. Well, absolutely. I mean, it wasn't a predominant thing that came out of in the survey, but if you do, anyone who looks at the full report that's available online, we tried to really not, change what people said, other than just kind of some grammar. But you can read through that and all the different comments that the producers that responded made in the process, and there were quite a bit of a few of those that noted an awareness of kind of the challenge of these, the benefits that these large-scale mainline distributors, the benefits that they get from the larger manufacturers, and then also the benefit that they pass on to the schools to encourage contracting with the mainlines. And I think what Claire might be referring to is this idea, it's usually referred to as an off-invoice rebate or an off-invoice deduction, and essentially it just provides an incentive for an institution to work with a particular distributor or a distributor to work with a particular manufacturer. So, and really what it is it creates an unfair advantage for, as far as small producers getting in. It just makes it that much more difficult to compete with the scale there. So it wasn't a major thing that came up in the survey, although it was present. As far as the work that's happening on that, that's something that IATP has looked at a little bit, because really it's a political issue. There are laws that are in various states and also nationally that discourage these kind of things because they are anti-competition. And one of the groups that's also doing a lot of work on this is Real Food Challenge, who does their work at universities and helps university students or empowers them to work with the procurement staff at their university to change their contracting for food and to actually encourage more local and regional purchases. So it was present, and it's definitely an area of more work.
Thank you, Pete. I can go into the next question in just a moment. I will say about 38 after, so we do have plenty of time for questions. But if for some reason we don't get to your question, we will have a list of them at the end that we can contact you with after the fact. And you're always more than welcome to email Pete, Jason, or I. Our emails are right there on the screen if you think of any questions after the fact or didn't get your question answered. But we should have some more time right now. So we'll jump into the next one. Is there a graph or list showing where all of these farms are located? I'm guessing that's referring to those farms that responded to this survey. I don't know if that's actually part of the report, but I think contact information is something that we did collect. Is that something you could speak to a little bit more, Pete?
Yeah, sure. So going back to one of the things that Jason mentioned earlier, the 142 respondents to the survey came from 56 counties in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and South Dakota, and really a vast majority of them were coming from Minnesota itself. It's just a handful from Wisconsin right across the border, as well as South Dakota. So, essentially kind of 60%, I'd say probably about 60% of the counties in the state of Minnesota had some representation in the survey. And we have thought about kind of putting that all on a map to see where, these little nodes of activities are coming. That's probably a natural next step, especially based on the fact that, as Grace mentioned, and that what Jason and SFA is working on around these working groups around particular areas of interest, naturally that would be kind of a next step. So I think that when we get the time, we'll start sticking some pins in the map and see where there might be some areas of particular activity.
Thank you, Pete. I have a question. Is the survey questionnaire available? We had the survey open for about 6 weeks, I believe, last late fall, kind of November to early December, I think it was. We closed it there in mid-December. So the questionnaire isn't live anymore. Perhaps if you're interested in receiving a copy of the survey questions that we asked, you can email any one of us here on the screen. Hopefully that answered that question.
And one thing I'll just throw in there, this is Pete. If you download the report from the website, we've also, that includes every question. It doesn't necessarily include every single option in particular response, because if there were no responses to a particular option, they didn't necessarily get included. So if you want to get a flavor for the questions and how they were worded, you can check out that full report, and that'll give you a sense of not only the questions, but also the options and response areas.
Thank you. And I would say something that was mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. The development of the survey questionnaire was very collaborative, and we wanted to make sure that we tested it not only with other partner organizations and institutions, but with the farmers that would be taking it as well. So we did go through a pretty extensive process trying to make sure that it was the right survey. We were, in making this a collaboration, trying to minimize the number of reaches that farmers were getting from a lot of these different institutions. So it was a very very collaborative process. I have another question. If we pay someone to aggregate our products, that will add costs, which makes it harder to get markets like schools, because the costs will be higher, yes or no. I'll open that up to all of the panelists. I do know that many communities are finding it helpful to meet those higher volumes by aggregating. So let's see if any of our panelists have anything to add about what aggregation costs add and how it may or may not make it more difficult to get institutions to be able to purchase them as far as cost goes.
Well, this is Jason, and I guess I would say that that's where the farmer networking comes in, and potentially uniting with other farm-to-institution sellers, where you could locate some people in your geographic area, perhaps, or work out ways to aggregate those things with a minimum of cost. I know that there are some SFA chapters and people who are just located near each other geographically anyway, who are already doing this sort of thing, selling to restaurants and other co-ops and that sort of thing. So I do think that that's where the networking part can really come in handy, because often you hear stories of people who find that there are people in their county, in their town, or even literally, 2 farms down from each other, who are both doing the same thing and didn't know it. Once you connect those people, it can be sort of an aha moment where they can start networking, start working together, and build those connections.
I would also maybe suggest looking at the University of Minnesota Extension Food Hub information. They've got a lot of great research on how communities in Minnesota and across the nation are making it work, whether some of the food hubs are potentially supported by grants or other types of community partnerships and funders, or the fact that in aggregating these products and making them available to larger markets, that they can still meet their financial needs. But I think it's an important question and something that speaks to the sustainability of food hubs and aggregators. But like Jason said, there are a lot of small and medium-sized ways to do it as well. Another question, we've got about 15 more minutes to go. Are you finding that farmers are seeking to sell directly as a vendor to various institutions, or that they're trying to sell to mainline distributors who sell to their local distributions? What is working better, particularly in schools? And I might take a quick crack at this before opening it up to the panelists. I think it's a combination, and it really depends on the community and the institution that farmers are looking at. The larger the institution, I would say, the more it's necessary to go through mainline distributors. And I know that a lot of rural communities or smaller institutions like child cares can be contacted directly. So I would say it depends on the community. Peter, Jason?
Yeah, this is Pete. I think you're right. That's an important question, and I think if we look back to a few slides back to where or who producers want to work with, the first they said was they want to work with each other, and then they want to work directly with institution staff. But down on the the kind of the fifth one, I think we had the Minnesota Department of Agriculture was the third, and then the fourth was nonprofit organizations. But the fifth one was actually working with the distributors. So there's an awareness that distributors are, play a crucial role in this process, and I think there are a lot of options out there for engaging with distributors, and of course that's going to vary based on their size and based on their location. But there's a difference that should be noted between mainline distributors and kind of more secondary distributors that are typically a little smaller. And a lot of institutions, particularly schools, they typically depend on one, maybe two mainline distributors that are really bringing in a lot of their product from a very wide range of locations and geographies. But they also do rely on smaller distributors that kind of operate more on the state or regional level that might be picking up stuff that is easier or more appropriate to get from a smaller company. And I think that those are really the opportunities to focus on developing partnerships and conversations with distributors, because I think that the traditional way is for the farmer to build a direct relationship with the institution staff, as they mentioned in their, who they want to work with. And a lot of the kind of the regional networking events, a lot of times it's about putting those particular groups in the same room and helping them build those relationships. Distributors are increasingly becoming part of the conversation, and you do see some good examples. There are some happening just here in the Twin Cities, examples of great small-scale distributors as well as processors that are working directly with institutions like public school systems to essentially kind of meet their needs and make sure that they're creating a relationship and a conduit between the producer and the ultimate institutional purchaser. So they're helping to kind of iron out some of the food safety and liability issues. They're also dealing with some of the specifications and some of the packaging requirements. So I think that moving forward, that's a big part of this. There's always going to be institutions that are going to always do face-to-face relationship building with the institution. As Grace mentioned, small scale, in-home childcare is going to, they're not really necessarily going to a distributor, but those conversations are going to be necessary as you move up into the higher rungs, like the University of Minnesota, just simply because personal relationships are just way too difficult to maintain for something so huge. So that would be, that'd be kind of my take on the whole thing, and I think it'll be interesting to watch that evolve.
Thank you, Pete. I have a question about how to access the report itself. The link right there on the screen looks right. It's on IATP's website, iatp.org/document/ and then the words Building Minnesota's Farm to Institution Market with dashes between the words. You can also search IATP Building Minnesota's Farm to Institution Market on Google, and you should be able to find your way there. And we'll also have it available on all of the partners' websites and social media. We really welcome you to take a look and follow up with us if you have any more questions.
Just a quick note, like pop in really quickly, Grace. Patrick has put the link into the chat box that should be in your control panel. So if you're looking at that, there should be a link there that's clickable. So right now, if you're interested, or after, it'll go away when the webinar ends. So make sure you kind of copy it down now or click on it now, and that'll take you directly to the document that's on the web.
Thank you, Pete and Patrick. I think that looks like it wraps up most of our questions that have been asked right now. I would welcome you again to feel free to email any of us as questions come up as you look through the report. And I want to thank one more time all of our panelists and all of our participants for taking the time to review the results of this survey. It's been great to get this kind of feedback so that we can make sure we're really meeting the needs and the barriers that are there on the ground. Thank you very much, and we can wrap it up here. Any final words, Peter, Jason?
I don't think so. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you everyone.